Today's guest is a record industry legend, Vivian Scott Chew. Vivian's an industry trailblazer. She was the first African-American woman to be a membership rep at ASCAP and went on to be the VP of A&R at Epic Records and the head of urban music for Sony 550, where she brought dancehall to America with Shabba Ranks, Little Vicious, and Patra. She reintroduced the legend George Clinton as well. She then launched Time Zone International, the first Black-owned company of its kind, putting artists like Jill Scott, India Arie, and JoJo on the global map. She's the co-founder of Chew Entertainment with her husband Ray Chew. They have sold-out shows at Carnegie Hall, had events for the National Urban League, the Jackie Robinson Foundation, big stages, big moments. This one's going to be special. Vivian Scott Chew is next on Mixed and Mastered. Welcome to Mixed and Mastered, the podcast where the stories of the music industry come to life. I'm Jeffrey Sledge, bringing you real conversations with the people who have shaped the sound of music. We're pulling back the curtain on what it takes to make it in the music business. These are the stories you won't hear anywhere else, told by the people who live them. This is Mixed and Mastered. Welcome to Mixed and Mastered, where I'm talking to my music mom. She's known me since 1996, I think it was. She hired me in 1996. Let me rephrase that. Vivian Scott Chew. Hi.
Hey, baby. And you know I am nowhere old enough to be your mom.
You were not my music big sister.
No. I will be your fairy godmother. How about that? Can I say fairy godmother?
Yeah, absolutely. It could take that too. How are you?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Good. You're looking good. I love your background. I love your hair. I love your makeup. I love your swag, as the kids say. Your drip.
I had to show up for you. I had to show up for Mixed and Mastered.
I really appreciate that. And I think people are going to enjoy this conversation from a music veteran who's done so much. And I want to let the people know what you've done from your mouth to God's ears.
Thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. You're raised in Far Rockaway. I mean, the beginning.
And actually, there's a few. It's Kelly Price, MC Search, and some of the earlier handball champions of the world. We all come from Far Rockaway, a very interesting place to grow up at the time that I grew up. Because
what was it like?
Segregation. You know, we grew up in a predominantly Hasidic Jewish neighborhood. It was definitely them on one side of the street, us on the other side of the street. I'm not talking about our block. Our whole block was black with black ownership. There was a main street, and there were streets that shot off at this main street, and you definitely knew to stay on your side of the street. And, I am in my 60s, which doesn't seem like that long ago when it comes to segregation, because I remember not being able to eat at the Woolworths and sit at the counter. I remember my mom buying clothes one size larger and then taking them to the dressmaker because Black people were not allowed to try on clothes. So that really wasn't that long ago, but growing up in Far Rockaway was, makes me the beach girl that I am. I grew up right off Beach 9th Street, and the water was always my safe place.
So tell me where your passion for music came from.
My passion for music came from growing up in the church. I'm a church girl. All right. So my mother was secretary of the church. My father was the head of the trustees.
Damn.
Basically, the dude that ran everything.
Yeah.
And I went to church 8 days a week. And I noticed very early in my childhood, since I had to be at church, it was always about the choir. It was always about the music. And gospel music to this day hits me in the same space that funk music hits me, and the same space that house music hits me. And my husband, Ray, who's a musician, said the commonality between the three is that they use a lot of minor, ninth, and 11 chords, all three of them. So that's where it resonates on me. So you can't tell me that music and our bodies and our spirits are not one. It's all I ever wanted to do.
Oh yeah, that's so. I mean, obviously gonna go deeper to the music, but like, and reading, I don't know why I didn't notice. I didn't know you went to Georgetown University.
I did. I'm a proud Georgetown College dropout.
How was it? I mean, because I know it's a predominantly white school, it's always been, but like, how was it back then?
Well, there's a very specific reason why I went to Georgetown, because my plan was not to go to college. I was a professional volleyball player. And so I had this whole grand plan that I was going to go to Europe before a lot of Black athletes were doing that. I'm talking about this is in the 70s. And to go to Europe and make my claim to fame and live there. I've always wanted to live outside the U.S. I have even more reason now to want to live outside the U.S.
Exactly.
Hey, that may come into fruition. But so my mom said, okay, so plan A didn't work. Plan B is you got to take your ass to college, because I went to an all-white Jewish private school in Long Island called Woodmere Academy. And I just picked D.C. because it was the blackest place on the map.
It was chocolate city. Back then, it was chocolate
city. Absolutely. And that's how I ended up at Georgetown, and spent a year there and went, this ain't happening. And, full transparency, I had to figure out a reason not to go to college anymore for my mother not to kill me. So I came up with this great idea. I know what, I'll get married. And I did.
Wow.
I got married, which was the biggest mistake I could have ever made, but also the biggest blessing, because out of that, came my daughter, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back to New York after being in DC, and always knew I wanted to be in the music business. Couldn't find a job, went to work for a landscape architect, and then started dating someone else who was in the music industry, an engineer, and he had a professor. And her name was Louise West. And she was an entertainment attorney. And that's where everything changed for me.
Yeah, I love Louise. She's a definition of an OG. Like, she's like OG. She's helped too many people to mention. And I actually want to have her on here. I haven't reached out to her yet, but she's on I have a big list in my phone, and she's on my list. I really want to talk to her because I know she got some stories. So tell me about how that happened, how you got the job with Louise, and how it came to fruition.
Yeah. Total serendipity. When I found, back in the day, we used to look for jobs in the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. I got my first music job.
And there was an ad for an assistant to an entertainment attorney. His name was Jeffrey Hafer. And when I went for the interview, it was an office that was shaped as a rectangle. And so the principals were all in the corners. So Jeffrey Hafer and his business partner, another very well-known entertainment attorney by the name of Ina Maybach, they had one suite. Another suite was the late, great Kendall Minter, who I also ended up working for at one point in my life. And then Louise was at one point, and I can't remember who was at the other, but I interviewed with Jeff and Ina. And as I was leaving, there was a table outside of an office with a phone on it, and there were 3 lines. And all 3 were lit up and ringing. And when I looked in the corner, there was this little demure Black woman that had the phone, and you could tell that she was just, and I said, what's your name? She said, Louise West. And I went, hi, Louise West office. Can I help you?
Wow.
No, literally. And then after we got all the phones settled down, she said, come here, who are you? And I told her. And then it turned out that she had been a former professor of the man that I was dating, who was an engineer, a recording engineer. And that's how that all sort of came together. And I said, you just look like you needed some help. She said, well, leave me your phone number and we'll talk. And in less than a week, I became her assistant. So needless to say, I got offered the other job, which paid more. But I was just so excited I never had met any Black woman in the music industry before. Mm-hmm. So, Louise, who turned 83 this year.
That is why you just picked up her foot. That's funny. That's a good story. Yeah. Like, so, I mean, the music obviously is very different now than it was back then. What were your first impressions of like work from the legal side, like working in the music business back then?
Mm-hmm. Well, Louise represented a lot of Black music executives. And that was the time when Black music executives were finally getting paid the same amount as their white counterparts. So Louise was that attorney that was going in and not making sure that they got the right salary, they got the right bonuses, the right incentives, that they had points into perpetuity on artists that they signed, that their packages were together. So that was one side of her. But then the other side of her was these musicians and singers and songwriters who used to just always come and camp out in her office. And she said, you know what, Viv, they may or may not sell records, but all one of them needs to do is write a hit song. And it's something called publishing. And if you can hold on to that, that's like buying a prime piece of real estate, and you can live out the rest of your life on that. And that's when I got very interested in this thing called publishing and what that was. And so I learned about publishing from Louise, which primes me for one of my future jobs, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we definitely going to talk about it. Yeah, definitely.
But, you know, it was a great time. It was the mid-80s, and there were clubs in New York that were spilling out. And I mean, we were going and listening to 3 or 4 different bands and bands. I was talking bands with like drums and bass and guitar and hanging out. You know, the music was, you know, because I went to an all-white private school, you know, I knew as much about Charlie Wilson as I did Led Zeppelin. So, you know, my music library was very, very vast. And Louise, coming from DC, I mean, she brought that whole funk thing to me that I really wasn't aware of. We just had a lot of fun. And I got to meet some of her clients, you know, like Mona Scott Young. You know, started out with Louise, but also Louise is responsible for Rockefeller Records. And a lot of people don't realize that
I didn't know that
she put the deal together. She put together Missy's deal.
I knew
that. Missy was the first female rapper to have her own label deal. That was done through Sylvia Rhone. So I had a really, and Louise ended up hiring me 3 times. Every time I decided to quit a job or got fired from a job, I always was able to go back home to Louise.
Wow.
I owe her a lot.
I don't know if you remember when we were at Epic, I still remember this. We had dinner. We went to some dinner, and that's when I first met Louise at the dinner that we went to. And she introduced us. She was, you know, sweet as pie, and we were talking. And I was like, "So what do you have?" And she was like, "I got this girl. She was in this group, but they got dropped. This group called Sister. Somebody had given me their cassette that never came out. That album. I wish I still had it." And I was like, "She said this girl Missy." And I was like, "You have Missy?" And I remember went to this whole thing, and I was trying to sign her, and I was talking to Missy on the phone. She came by the office at one time and told to her mom and all this. The deal, I went up to Rochester or Elmira, where we were recording upstate, and the deal didn't get done. But Louise was very helpful in trying to put that together. Then it went to Sylvia, but she was just really, really nice and trying to help that move along. She was dope.
And an unsung hero, you know. So I last year decided that I was going to celebrate her. So I did an event for her at the Sunset Marquis in LA and invited all of her colleagues and anybody who couldn't come. We had on video, so Missy and Timberland and Mona and 40, you know, Drake's 40 producer.
I didn't know she was 40's lawyer too. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow.
So we gave her a wonderful celebration. And it was one of those things that you would have thought that she had passed on and we were doing it. But it was, Lou, we want you to be here and to see how much you are loved. We need to do that.
Yeah, we do. That's what this, you know, going off on a tangent, but that's the genesis for this show. It's like I was, you know, Quincy passed away and Clarence Avon passed away. And I was like, man, these people are passing away and some people are not getting to tell their story. So I wanted to do that through this medium, you know? So tell me, I was reading your bio and there's some things I just didn't know. Even before we get to ASCAP, you worked with one of my favorite, and I'd say top 5, I wouldn't say 10, most underrated writers and producers.
Yeah.
Kashif.
Yeah.
And I'm still got his stuff in my phone. Like I'm a massive Kashif fan. Like anything his albums, stuff he did for the people. Tell me about that. And did you work with Hush? Was Hush involved with him at that time, or was it?
He was managed by Hush.
Okay.
But here we go. Another serendipitous moment. I left Louise, got a job at Radio City, working in the concert division.
Wow.
Now, this is like my dream job because I'm being paid to watch shows, to do shows. And I was in the very elite booking department. So, you know, it was just, I got to see, I saw Prince, I saw Marvin Gaye, I saw Kiss, you know, New Year's Eve, put a joint underneath everybody's seat and went, Happy New Year, reach out, you know. So some really iconic things. But then my boss at the time got his new employment contract couriered and I went down to pick it up and the envelope was open. So the envelope was open and I read it and I went, he's making what? And I'm making what? And by this time I'm divorced. I'm a single mother. I'm taking care of my daughter. And I went to him and asked him for a raise, and he told me that they wouldn't be able to do it. Wow. That was one of my first Malcolm X moments in my career, because it was like, if I stand for this, I'm gonna fall for anything. So I said, well, you know what? I gotta go. And I already knew that I was going to get unemployment, and then I would just figure it out. I walk out of the building, my head's down. I get hit by a bicycle, but not like where I'm laid out on the ground, but just tap. And I looked up, and it's Kashif. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? He said, how you doing? I said, he's like, so where are you working? I said, well, I was working over there until about an hour ago. He said, great, I'm looking for an assistant. Come work for me. So I was unemployed for about 37 minutes.
What? I can't believe, my God.
What's the likelihood?
Wow.
And you talk about, you're right, one of the most unsung, Michael Jones, AKA Kashif. And amazing. I learned so much. We only worked together for a year, but it was the right timing. He had just bought the Jackie Robinson estate in Stamford, Connecticut. And he tore down one of the guest houses and made that into a studio. So I got to see the making of that and the building of that. And then also he had signed on songwriters and producers. So I saw how he worked with them and mentored them, and a lot of those people's songs, including Lala Cope's famous You Give Good Love, Whitney Houston's first hit, was written by one of Kashif's songwriters, and he produced that song. And then I also got to go on the road. And that was probably one of my most favorite parts of all of it, because I love to travel, and I got to travel. Unfortunately, we didn't go overseas. So it was only domestic, but I got to get on a tour bus. And so I learned how to be a road manager, and then how to be a tour manager. And at that time I was like, in my 20s, and there were no girls that were doing it. So of course, when it came time to pick up the money, the male promoters didn't want to give me the money, and that became a thing. And so then I had to call some of my gangster friends to be like, okay. But, Kashif, he created a sound.
Yes.
Like the Silvers created a sound. Jimmy and Terry created a sound. Ellie and Babyface, Teddy Riley. These are all producers that you could hear and go, I know they did that.
Yep.
Same thing with Kashif. And for him, it was the mini moog. It was that bass. That. And he also had a piece of equipment that nobody else had called a synclavier. And so what a synclavier is, and it weighed about 1,000 pounds because we had to truck it all throughout the country. What you call now stems was really what the synclavier housed. So his entire show, all the big lush strings and background vocals and everything, he pre-recorded onto this piece of equipment called a synclav. And so I got to learn a lot. A lot of my technology background comes from just sitting in the studio and watching him do stuff. But rest his soul. Gone too long. Gone too soon. Forgive me.
Absolutely. Real sidebar. I've always wondered this. The movie. What's the movie with the first Halle Berry movie that Andre did?
Right, where she was a dancer.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember that movie, but in that movie, Tommy Davidson was the lead, and they had money problems and they didn't know what to do. And Tommy was like, I'm gonna go uptown and meet with these guys, the Hollowin brothers, these big kind of guys, and they were like street guys. They filmed that scene in Perks, actually, and in Harlem, because Tommy was from Harlem. A lot of that movie is in Harlem, and I always wondered, were those Bo and Charles Huggins inspired? I always wondered that. I was like, they might be Charles and Bo Huggins inspired. These kind of gruff guys, you know what I'm saying?
Sounds about right. And they were
sounds about right. So tell me about your going to ASCAP.
So then Kashif lets me go. I'm telling you, every time without a job, I go back to Louise.
You get hit by another bike.
I go back to Louise, and there was something that was very influential in my career, and it was called the Black Music Association. And it was started by the late, great LeBaron Taylor, who was a senior vice president at CBS and then Sony. And because of him, so many of us became vice presidents, and we were paid the way we were supposed to. But LeBaron Taylor, George Ware out of Philadelphia, and Kenny Gamble. And so the Black Music Association started in Philly, and they would have conferences, but they would also have seminars at different record companies. And Louise said, look, you should go and you should volunteer. So I had a job. I was a mom, plus I was volunteering because she knew Louise is one of those people that she's Mama Louise, but she knows that when it's time for you to fly, she will kick you out that nest and you got to figure it out. So she was basically kicking me out of the nest.
Okay.
And saying, you need a real job with real benefits, all of that. And I had heard about a position at ASCAP, American Society of Composers and Publishers, but I didn't think that I was qualified for it. So I kept referring other people for this position, which was that of a membership rep. And then finally they came to me and said, well, why don't you apply? And I just hadn't thought about it. And I did, and I got it. And I ended up being the first African-American female membership rep that ASCAP ever had.
Wow.
Good time. Good,
So
good 3 years. Yeah.
In a very short synopsis, before we're going to go into, your run at ASCAP, but please break down a very short synopsis of what ASCAP does, because I don't know if a lot of people really know what they do.
Sure. So there are 3 performing rights societies. ASCAP is one, which stands for the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. There's BMI, which is Broadcast Music, Inc. And then there's CSAC, which was a privately owned company. They recently became public. It was a French-owned company. So anytime that you hear music, artists or who are songwriters and publishers have the right to be paid. And so what pot of money do they get paid out of? It is these 3 societies going and collecting fees from every radio station, TV station, now streaming platform, even to supermarkets or the dentist's office. Any place that you hear music has to acquire a blanket license for the right to play any of the music that any of these 3 societies hold. So that's ASCAP. I knew Louise primed me a bit in publishing, but I didn't know about performing rights. So I had to do a crash course in all of that. But to be able to see some of my most favorite songwriters, from Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, Quincy Jones, Jimmy and Terry, they were all ASCAP members. And I was privy to seeing their statements and would be like, I need to learn how to write a song.
Crazy money. Wow.
So that's what they do.
Now, how long were you at ASCAP?
I was there for 3 years.
Okay.
And again, I'm about to get fired. This time I'm about to get fired. This is before, now they have the urban music or black music, whatever they call it, department. It wasn't that at all. There were about 4 or 5 membership reps. Members would call. It would go into the bank of secretaries. Then they would just sort of like round robin. And so whoever you got is who you got. And I have to tell you this story. I remember coming in from lunch, and this is when your messages would be written. And on this pad, it said Richard Penniman. And I remember the phone number. It was 213-657-1234.
Wow.
And I'll tell you why I remember the number. Here's a fun fact. Every Hyatt around the world's phone number ends in 1234. Check it. You'll see. All right.
I didn't know that.
So 213 is LA, and it's a Hyatt. Hyatt on Sunset. And I'm like, so who's calling me from the Hyatt on Sunset? And it had a room number. And when I called, I said, hi, this is Vivian Scott for Mr. Penman. He said, girl, I've been waiting for you to call. And I went, and then I recognized the voice. It was Little Richard. And he was talking about, he said, they done stole my money, girl. He's going to help me get it back. But I mean, it was stories like that and being able to help him.
Yeah.
And being able to help a lot. There was always money that was unclaimed at ASCAP. So once a year we would get a run. And that's how I met Benny Medina. Benny Medina was a songwriter, and I didn't know he wasn't the Benny Medina at that time. And his name was on the list. And I called him, Mr. Medina, we have some money for you. I mean, and that's why everybody loved me, because I was the woman with the money.
You was the one getting people checks.
The woman with the money.
Yeah.
But Black Music Month, it wasn't Black Music Month. Billboard had its top 100 songwriters of the year. And for this particular edition, the top 3 pop songwriters were Stevie Wonder, Lionel Richie, and Quincy Jones. Black people.
Wow.
But there were no awards at ASCAP. They had the Pop Awards, the Country Awards, and the British Awards. There were no awards celebrating Black writers.
And they were the top 3 writers with no awards.
Exactly. So I go to my immediate boss and I said, this isn't fair. I'm going to write up a whole proposal. We need to have another award show. And she said, it'll never get greenlit. And as a matter of fact, don't even go to our boss's boss with this, because it's just not going to happen. Again, am I going to stand up?
Yep.
So I waited for the songwriter publisher meeting. Ashford and Simpson were in that meeting because they were on the board at the time. And it was lunchtime, and I had all of my stats and everything prepared. And I went in and I basically stood on top of the soapbox and I gave every single reason as to why. And I remember Nick Ashford just nodding me on like, keep on going.
Tell him.
And I left, and I had some boxes in my office because I started to pack because she told me I was going to get fired. So I had already figured out some hustle I was going to do. Because, you know, when you get fired, you get unemployment. So between unemployment and whatever I was going to do, I was going to be fine.
Yeah.
And her boss came in and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I was told that I was going to get fired. So I figured I'd get ahead of the game." And he's like, "Stop." He said, "We owe you an apology. We just never thought of it. It wasn't that it came up and we said no. We just never thought about it." And that's how the ASCAP Rhythm and Soul Awards, you know, were birthed. And that's over, what are they, 35 years?
So they do it every year now. It's a big thing.
So it's a big thing.
And you started it.
I started it.
Wow. So after ASCAP and starting awards and getting Richard Penniman, Little Richard the check, you went to Polygram, correct? Polydor.
So I went to Polygram. So there was Polydor and there was Polygram, which is now Universal Music.
Yeah.
And I really was not familiar with what A&R was. There was very few women, let alone very few Black women, that were doing it at the time. And I was at an event, at a BMI event, actually, and was approached by a gentleman by the name of Tony Prendat, who was director of A&R.
I remember Tony Prendat.
Working under, this is going to take you back, Jerome Gasper.
I don't remember him.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember.
So Jerome Gasper, Black Music Department. This is when Black music departments were mighty and strong and had their own infrastructure and really supported the artists that were signed. I
tell younger executives that all the time. I'm like, y'all don't understand. There were Black music divisions within all the majors. Like I said, Polygram, CBS, which is not, Sony, Warner Brothers, and they were these kind of autonomous things. They had their own budgets, like you said, their own staff. It's like, and they all supported the artists and supported each other. Like if they needed a job, it's like, go on there and talk to Ray Harris. They might get you something. Like it was that kind of thing. And that I missed that because they have no idea how it, and that money started moving in a circle, which I think became a problem for the powers that be. Because it was like the publicity people and the radio people, it was all kind of moving in our infrastructure. And then they were like, wait a minute. We giving these dudes too much money. We making too many stars. But I'm sorry. No.
But I do want to say something about Black music departments and what made them so special is that we were family.
Yes.
And it was a place where you could go and be nurtured. You could get your wrist slapped in the family. Anybody outside the family didn't know. We always kept everybody else's secrets or mistakes or faux pas or whatever within the family. And that's how we were, we groomed executives. And what I thought was with the demise of Black music departments is that young Black executives were not prepared. They were not groomed for what they were going into. So a lot of their tenures was very short.
Yes.
There was a lot of hiring. You're getting $500,000 and then 18 months later, you're gone.
Because you didn't, I remember not going off a tangent, but I remember when you hired me, one of the first things you told me, you called me in the office, and I remember you was like, you know why a lot of Black executives get fired? They don't do their expenses, or they use a corporate card and go shopping and all that stuff. And I remember you told me, and I never forgot that. You got to you can't give them any reason to knock you out. Like, right. But those type of conversations don't happen now.
Yeah.
From a mentor to a younger Black executive, like stuff that you wouldn't even think about how important that is to have your expenses intact. Like have your, you can't, so, but anyway.
If you're going to do some dumb shit, cover your ass. I don't want to know about it.
Yeah, we all did some dumb shit. That's,
And we'll be right back. Ready to launch your podcast? Merrick Studios offers comprehensive services from concept development and seamless production to strategic marketing and monetization. Let your story take the mic. Visit merrickcreative.com/studios and let's get to work.
Master the art of lyricism with Pendulum Mink, the first school for rap. Learn elite techniques through immersive lessons, real-world exercises, and guidance from hip-hop icons. This is where MCs sharpen their skills and glow boldly on the mic. Ready to level up? Visit pendulummink.com and start your journey today.
And now, back to our show.
So you were a Polygram. Was it Eckstein at Mercury and stuff then, or no?
Eckstein came after.
Okay.
He came after with Wing Records, and then he also became head of Black music right when I was leaving to go to Epic. But I didn't know what A&R was. And the reason why they hired me was because of my relationship with songwriters. So at that time, A&R really was artists and repertoire. So Jeff, our job was you sign an artist. Now you got to go find songs. You got to find a producer. You have to be in the studio with them. You've got to talk to marketing about what the brand is going to look like, even to creative services, to what colors were used. I mean, we were very, very hands-on. Unfortunately, I was very blessed to have bosses that allowed me to do that. So I was a real anomaly. There was no women doing this at the time. And I signed an artist that was a game changer for me, but not in a way you would think. Her name was Sapphire. Remember, there was a genre called Latin hip hop.
Yes, but I remember her. It was like freestyle kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I used to live up on Dyckman Street at that time. So I lived in Inwood.
You was in the heart of it.
I was in the heart of the Latin community. And there was a record store that I would go to all the time, played me this demo of this girl. We ended up signing her. I don't know if this happened at Epic, but at Polygram, we used to have meetings where the A&R department, marketing department were in one meeting, and it happened maybe twice a year. It was the dreaded P&L meeting. And they would put up every single artist, and you would see basically how much money you lost the company. Like everybody was in the red. So it was about how bad in the red are you? You already knew you were going to be in the red until Sapphire goes up and it's in the black. And we hadn't sold that many, but I couldn't really, and she was very high maintenance. It was always wardrobe and makeup, and I couldn't understand it. And the general manager, Bob Jameson at the time, he rolled his chair over and he whispered and he said, "International." And that planted a seed for a future job that I did. And I went, wow, I had no idea that there was even territories outside of the U.S. We were so absorbed in selling records in New York and L.A. Atlanta wasn't even on our radar.
No, not at all. Back then, no.
It was all about New York and LA and the South. Okay. But not Atlanta as like
just like the South as a segment.
As a region. But there was Europe, there was Asia, there was South America, there was all these places that I never thought of. And I got a bonus. Wow. I was the only A&R person that got a bonus, which was really cool. I took everybody out to dinner. I was like, I'm keeping the rest of my bonus, but we got Mr. Chow tonight.
More chicken satay.
Satay for everybody.
Extra sauce.
So that was really the light bulb that went off, and it made me go, wow, think globally. Think about artists that are going to sell records, not just in the US, but outside the US. And, I'll say I have a very competitive nature, and I had heard that Warner Brothers was about to sign one of my favorite bands, which was Third World. And Third World already had such a base. They were already international stars. I just knew I had to make the right record. And at that time, Black people weren't listening to reggae. Reggae was very much pop stations. Black radio did not play. So
white audiences, white colleges,
absolutely.
Kids.
Absolutely. So I had to figure out how to blacken Third World to go into the market. So they ended up signing with me. And the first single we did was a song called Forbidden Love that featured Daddy-O from Stetsasonic as a rapper. And radio said, we don't play rap. That's how long ago this was.
Wow. Yeah.
That's not going to last. And you have to give me an edit without the rap on it. Wow. So we're like, fine. Here's an edit without the rap on it.
Yeah.
But the clubs played it.
Okay.
So we broke the original version in the clubs. We did the radio version on radio, and it got played across all the formats. And so Third World became a hit. And I got to spend time in my favorite country, Jamaica.
Yeah. We're going to get to that. So
that's how Jamaica comes into all of this, was by signing Third World.
Wow. Was anybody else you signed at Polygram before you moved on?
My very, very first signee is somebody who you know as an executive. His name is Leotis Clyburn.
Yes. He was an artist. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And we were ahead of our time from a sound. It was very New Jack City light
Okay.
kind of sound. But that was actually the first person that I signed. But forgive me, Third World, I think, was the most notable one, and the one that really changed my entire career because I was allowed to spend time in their country.
Wow, that's amazing. So after Polygram, you go to, let me go on my notes here. You can catch Mixed and Mastered on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that follow button, leave a review, and tell a friend. I'm your host, Jeffrey Sledge. Mixed and Mastered is produced and distributed by Merrick Studios.